Okay, what's up, everybody? We're back. I'm going to talk a little bit about arrays today. I know when I first started out, I had a lot of questions about arrays. I didn't know how to use them properly. I understood what they could do, but I needed to see like real world examples of them being used. That was the problem I ran into when I was watching tutorials, was it seemed like everybody was just making lists or something. They were just putting names into it. I guess that could be useful to certain people, but I learned better from actually seeing them in practical use. So I've got a couple examples here, and they're more real world examples, things that you very well could be using arrays for in whatever type of game you're making. So I've got one that's just going to be more of a beginner type example, and then one that's going to be more of a more complicated example. Both of these could be the start of something that you could use in your game. So I just want to kind of briefly talk about what an array is for anybody that doesn't know. So I'm going to use a vector for this example. Your array could be any type of a variable that you want. So I'm going to add a new variable in here, and I'm just going to call it location. Okay, and then I'm going to change it to a vector since we're dealing with the location here. Now, let's say, just for the point of this demo here, let's just say we wanted to store the player's location inside this variable. I can get player character from inside this cube spawner, and then I can drag off and get actor location. Okay, so all that's going to do is just return our player character's location here. So if I wanted to just set my player's location, I could just make a variable, drag it out, set it, connect the location that we want to set. So this right here would store the player's location and everything would be good. Arrays come in handy when you have multiple locations to do. So let's say if I wanted to store the player's location on start, and then let's just say I wanted to do a delay, and then I wanted to store a different location. I could do that using this single variable here, and that would work. But what's going to happen is you're going to lose that first location. So if there's something to where you don't want to lose these locations at, that's when an array can come in, because an array could hold both of these locations in one variable. So instead of setting our location here, we're going to make a array. So you can make an array by just making a variable, and then you can right click and you'll get that little grid pattern. That's telling you that that's an array. You can also click on your variable and come up here to the drop down, and then you can pick single, array, set, map. So we can pick array that way. Now, if I drag this out into the world, it gives me the get version like every other variable, except now I'm getting the array. And then if I hold Alt and drag this out to set it, just like any other variable, now I can set this entire array. You probably won't use this a lot unless you're taking something from one array and trying to populate a whole nother array with it. You probably won't be using this too much. So I'm just going to get rid of that for now. So we have our array that we made, but now we have nothing inside of this array. We have to add stuff to it, right? We have to add information to it. So just like any other variable, if I go to my default value, I have to compile it to get access to that. Once I compile that, it tells me right here, I have 0 array elements. Every time we add information to this array, it's going to store that information in an element. So there's two things that you need to know inside of an array. You're going to have the information that you're storing, which is going to be stored as the array element. And that array element is going to have a specific spot inside of the array that it's storing it at. And that's going to be the index. So as long as you can wrap your head around index and element, this is going to be pretty easy. So right now we made our array and we haven't added anything to it. So we can add elements to it by clicking this little plus here. And you can see it tells us right now the 0 array elements in here. So if I add something to that, now it's saying that we have one array element, and that array element is at index 0. So arrays are always going to start at index 0 and then go up from there. So if we add another one, you can see now we have 2 array elements. So we have 2 places we can store information. In this case, we can store a vector. And since we have 2 elements, there has to be a location for each one of them. So our first element is being stored at index 0. And our next element is being stored at index 1. So we can manually tell it how many elements we want in the array, and it will just keep adding one element after the other in sequential order from index 0 on. This is one way that we can add elements to our array. Okay, then if I delete that, so we can also drag off this array and do a add. And now what add will do is when this fires here, it's going to get our array, and it's going to add a new index into that array. So just like how we click this plus button here, this add node is going to do the same thing for us. So maybe you only want to add something to this array when your character picks something up or gets to a certain place or whatever the case may be. So then it's going to ask for the array element, or it's going to add for the data that you want to store in there. In this case, we have a vector. So it's asking for a vector. It knows you want to add a new element inside of this array. The data that this array is going to hold, or the element that this array is going to hold, is going to be a location. So I can plug my get actor location in there. So now when this fires, we're going to get our array and we're going to add a new element to it. And that element we're adding is going to be the player's location. So by default, since this array doesn't have any elements in there, it's going to add an element at index 0. If this array already had some stuff in there, let's say that there was 2 elements in this array already, and we run this add node, it's going to just add the next element after the last one. So it would just add a third element for us at index 2. So this add node you can think of as doing the same thing as just coming up here and clicking plus. It's just going to add a new spot for us to store information. We can also drag off this and we can do a resize. So this can come in handy for something like maybe say an inventory or something like that, where if you know how big you want your array to be, you can tell it right here. It's asking you for the size of the array. So if we wanted 4 spots in this array, we can just tell it right there. We want 4 spots. This isn't letting us add information. This is going to open the array up so that we can then add elements to it. So what this is going to do is just add 4 spots into our array, but we can't populate our elements with it. We can't tell it, hey, we want this to be this. This is just creating the 4 elements we need, but they're not being populated right now. So something with an inventory, you might want, when you start it, you might want 20 spots. But then every time you pick an item up, you're going to add whatever it is to the array. So the resize will come in handy. It's just, think of it like it's just opening the array up so that it can receive information. And the next node I want to talk about is the length. Okay, so all the length is going to do is basically give you the length of this array here. So for instance, if we don't have anything in here and we try getting the length of this array, it's going to give us 0 because there's 0 elements in here. So for example, if we click that, if we add 1 element to our array, then this would print out 1. The length of our array would be 1. So you can use this to check if an array is empty or how many elements it has. And the next one is going to be the remove index. So again, if we have 4 elements in our array already, maybe when the player drops something, or maybe when something specific happens, you want to remove a specific index from your array, you can do that here. So maybe as we're going along and we're collecting things, every time we collect something, you might want to add something to an array. But then maybe when the player uses an item or drops an item into the world or something like that, maybe you want to get rid of an item. So you can remove the index. Whatever index you want, you can put it in here. And we tell it we want to remove index 2. Okay, once this fires, it's going to loop through. It's going to remove index 2 and it's going to slide index 3 back down because these have to go in order. So it's going to remove index 2 and then index 3 would be the new index 2. So now instead of having 4 elements in this array, we would have 3 because we just removed index 2 and then slid index 3 down into its place. So there might be times when we use this too. And the next node is we have 2 of the same similar types here. We have the get. So anytime that we want to get about a specific index inside this array, we want to use the get node. With a regular variable, when we want to get it, we just drag it out and either pick get or hold our control key, and then we can get that information. But we can't really do that with an array because this can hold multiple values in it. So we can't, if we need a location, we can't just drag out and say, here, use this location, because this isn't feeding out a location. This is feeding out our array. Okay, where a regular variable, you could just say like, you know, okay, we'll just use this right here for a location. So that's going to be how the array is a little different. So in order to get the information that's in the array, you use these get nodes here. Now there's 2 different get nodes. So if you drag off and just say get, you'll see that we have get a copy and get a reference. If you want to change anything in that array, you want to get the reference to it. If you're just using it for data to pull information, so you can use the copy. And you can see that they're different here. If I zoom in even more, the get a reference is going to have the diamond. And if you just hover over it, it says by ref right there. So if you had to make any changes to the array, you can do that from the reference. So you won't be able to change the data that's in the array from this pin, but you can access it. So whatever you need to do, you can get the information here. But if you want to change the information, you have to do it from the reference. So then all this is doing is just asking you, what index do you want to get? Because this can have multiple indexes. So right here in this case, it has 4 indexes in there. I'm telling it, I want to get the information that's in there, and it's saying, okay, sure, what index do you want to get? So then I could say get index 1. So then it's going to come in here and it's going to pull the information from index 1 and output that on this pin here. So now if I was feeding this into anything else, let's just say we had something that we were setting, I can tell this, get the array, get whatever is in index 1, and we're going to send it out and set it. And then the last node that we're going to use is the set array element. So think of this as the equivalent of when you get a regular variable out and you hold alt and you set it. Just like the get, it's going to ask, what index do you want to set this at? We might be telling it to store the player character's location. So it's saying, okay, what index do you want to set this at? So when you use a set array element, you have to give it a index. So you might have 4 elements already in there. This would be used to change the value of one of the existing ones. Because if you wanted to add something new to it, then you would want to come and you would want to use the add node here. So this add node would add a new element to your array. This set array element is going to change the value of an element that's already in your array. So if I tell that set array element index 2, then it's going to come into index 2 and it's going to set my player location right here at index 2. Now, something that I want to just talk about real quick too is this size to fit down here. So let's say I'm going to just delete all the elements from the array here. So we can use this to add an element to our array as well if we check that size to fit. So if we look, we have no elements in our array. If we're telling it set array element and we check size to fit, what it's going to do is when this node fires is it's going to try and access index 0 from here. If this is empty, then there is no index 0. What size to fit will do is create an index 0 to add this item to. Okay, so this is just basically going to set whatever element or whatever data we want to be in a specific index. I'm just going to get the length of this array here. And right now we have nothing in there. So now I'm going to print the length of this array. Okay, we're going to get this array and we're just going to print the length. So how many elements are inside of this array? And again, we don't have any. If I click on my array, there's nothing in here. So we should have 0 here. And if you see at the top, it's printing 0. So the length of my array right now is 0, meaning that there's nothing inside of it. Okay, so now we're going to add an index in there. So we're adding, it's just going to be 0, 0, 0, but right now we're just adding something in there. Okay, we're just adding an element in there. And then I think we'll print the length of it again here. So now when we start, now it says 1. So we have 1 index in our array now, okay, because we just added this. And then if we were to take that out, if we just click on our array here, let's just say we manually add 4, and we'll just print the length of that. So now it's printing 4. So we have 4 elements in that array. So we're going to try using the set array element now. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to delete all the elements that are in my array. I have size to fit unchecked, and we're going to tell it to set the array element. So we're going to say index 0, we want to set it 0, 0, 0, and then print the length. So what's going to happen now is it's going to print 0. So that's what we were talking about before. This set array element, it's not adding an index in. It's saying, okay, you want to add this value to this index, but this index doesn't exist because there's nothing in our array. So then our array length is printing out at 0. But if we were to check size to fit here, now it's going to do the same thing, but it's going to recognize there's no index 0 and it's going to make one. So now the length of our array just printed as 1. So we added an element into our array by set array element and having size to fit checked. I'm going to get rid of the set array element. And we'll just go back to the add here. Let's make sure our array is empty, which it is. And then we're going to tell it that we want to add something into our array. So what I'm going to add is, we'll just add the player's location here. Okay, and now I want to print something. I want to print that location. So I can get that information from that array by this get node here. So this is going to add index 0. So I want to make sure I'm getting the information from index 0 here, and then we'll print that. So now when this fires, we're going to, again, if we click the variable here, we have no elements in our array. So this array is empty. So when we fire this event, we're going to add an element to that array. And that element we're adding is going to be the player's location. And the index it's going to be adding it to is going to be the first index, which is index 0. So once I add that information, I'm going to get index 0, and we're going to print the location here. So now you can see it printed 1399 for an X there, and then if I move, now it's 1479. So it's printing wherever the player's location is. Okay, so we're gonna use what we learned here, and we're gonna set up kind of a real world example, and we're gonna spawn a couple cubes in specific spots that we want to. So we already have this set up. So we can just populate our array with the locations that we want, and then we can have it spawn our cubes around. So using what we just went over, we can input the locations into this array by a couple different ways. We can either just make a couple spots and input it that way. That will work. We can use our set array element. We can set the elements for index 0, 1, 2, however many spots we want. So there's different ways we can do this. I'm just going to use this, and I'm just going to set up 3 spots here. So let's just say I wanted to put something in a specific spot. Now this is just one way that we can do it. I'm just going to use the blueprint that I used. Let's just say we want to put 2 cubes over here, right? I can just put that blueprint down and it gives me a location. I can just copy that and then go in here and paste it in as the location I want. You can see that location comes in right there. So now let's move it, and we'll get this location here. We'll paste that in for our second element, and then let's grab a third spot. Maybe we'll put one somewhere in the middle of the map here. So we'll copy that, paste that in as our third location. So now the array we made has 3 elements in there. Those elements are stored at index 0, 1, and 2. And now we can use that information any way we want to. So we're going to say we want to spawn a cube. So all I'm going to do is drag off here, and I'm going to spawn actor from class. And then I'm going to choose my pickup item that we made in an earlier video here. So now it's asking me for spawn transform. So we can split that open. Now we have a location, rotation, and scale we can pick here. So now we can do a couple different things here. But let's say we just want to, when this fires, we just want to spawn 3 cubes in those 3 spots. Okay, what we can do with an array is we can loop through it. So if I drag off and press F, that gives me a for each loop. Okay, now what I'm telling this to do is I'm feeding in an array to it, and then it has this pin called loop body. For every element that's in this array, this loop body is going to fire and do whatever code we have here. So if we have only one element in this array, then this loop is going to fire once, do what we're telling it to do, and then it's going to fire out the completed. So if there's something we want to do after whatever we're trying to do, we can have this fire multiple times to do the same action or the same process for each element in our index. And then once we're done, we can come off completed and tell it to do something. So in this example, we have 3 elements in our array here. So what this would be telling it to do is to go through each element. So it would start at index 0, which is our first element. It would spawn an actor. Then it would go to the next element, which is index 1, spawn the actor, and so on. So every time this loop body fires and it's doing whatever code we have here, the array element that is underneath the loop body is going to be the information that's stored in this variable. So that pin there is going to give me, the first time this fires, it's going to be firing from index 0. So this array element is going to be our index 0 element, or the vector that we're storing in there. So if I drag that over to the location now, so the first time this fires, it's going to be firing from index 0, and it's going to spawn the actor at that location. Then once that's done, it's going to loop again and go to index 1. So the loop is going to fire again, it's going to spawn, and then it's going to pick the location at index 1. And then once we're done there, it's going to loop, it's going to go to index 2, and it's going to spawn at the location that we have stored in there. And then once all three of those are done, it's going to fire out the completed pin. So I'm not really going to use this right here. We could do a print or something here, but it's going to happen so fast that it's just going to spawn and print. But if there is anything that you wanted to have happen after you do this, so we have our item picked, we have our location. I'm not going to give it a random rotation or anything. We'll just let it spawn however. And let's go in and check it out. So let's go back here so we can watch them all. Now we hit play, and then there we go. We have our 3 cubes that just spawned in from our array. So it just used the 3 locations that we stored to spawn these items. So now one more thing I'm going to do here is, okay, so I'm going to go to my Interact BPI, the blueprint interface that we made previously. So I'm just going to add a new function in here. I'm just going to call it spawn next cube. So I'm going to go into what I'm calling my pickup item, which is my cube here. Now, when I press pickup on a cube, I'm going to send that interface out. What I'm going to do is just call this spawn next cube here. When my cube receives the pickup pressed function and gets destroyed from the world, this is my pickup for it. So when this happens, I'm going to call this function that we just made spawn next cube here. So I'm going to drag off and do this. And see, it's not giving me the message, which is the one that I need. So there's 2 ways to kind of get around this. If you take context sensitivity off, you can have it here. See, that's the spawn next cube message. That's the one we want. But we can also do that. We're going to need a target to send it to. So if I do get all actors with interface, and then I pick the interact BPI that we have. So now if I drag off here and start typing in spawn next cube, you can see it comes up the one with the message. So anytime we're sending an interface out from one actor to another, we need the one that says message. So all we're doing here is when we pick a cube up, we're sending this interface called spawn next cube. Okay, so we're sending this out to everybody that's on Interact BPI, but we're only going to use it with one actor that's on there. So this is my cube spawner blueprint that we just made. So I'm going to go to class settings, and we're going to add the Interact interface to this. And then once we do, we have access to all the functions we made. So I'm going to double click the spawn next cube here. And now I'm going to change this a little bit, because what I want to have happen is when we start, I want it to spawn 1 cube and then stop. Something that we can do here is replace this for each loop with a for each loop with break. So this is going to do the same thing that I just described the for each loop does. However, we have the option here, we have an extra pin that says break. So we can stop this from looping at any time that we want. So I'm going to connect this up the same way. We're going to spawn, and we're going to use the array element as our spawn location. But then once we spawn, I'm going to stop this loop. And there is different ways that you can do this. So what this is going to do is stop the loop after it spawns. So it should only spawn 1, and then it's going to stop. And actually, before I do this, I want to do something else too. So I want to get this array, and I'm going to type in remove index, and we're going to put this at the end here. So after I spawn this cube, I'm going to be removing index 0 from this array. So we have 3 spots in here. It's going to loop through, go to index 0, it's going to spawn my cube at that location, and then I'm removing this index. So now 1 is going to move to where 0 was, 2 is going to move to where 1 is. So after I remove this index, I'm still going to have an index 0, because all these are going to slide down. Now when I pick a cube up, I want this to refire again, so I'm just going to connect this in here. I would do this a little different if I was actually doing this in my game or something like that, but this will just give an example of how to do this. So whenever I pick a cube up, we're going to refire this. And because we removed our index 0, now the new index 0 is going to be what was our second element, or our index 1. So this should, every time we pick a cube up, this should spawn the next cube for us. So let's see how that works. So if we do this, you can see that we only got 1 cube there. And then if we go over and we pick this cube up, it should spawn the next cube. And then if we pick this up, you should see the last cube spawn in the middle there. Arrays are so powerful and so strong, and I just didn't really get how to use them I understood what they did on paper, but as far as like implementing that into any game design or real world scenarios was just a little tough when I was starting out. So there's just a few kind of tips and things that I wanted to explain in here, things that I wish I knew when I first started out. But using something like this is actually practical. A lot of games will be spawning items in specific spots. And something like this is definitely going to be something that I think a lot of people will use. And even like a sequential spawn like we just did here. So when the player picks something up, it'll just keep looping and basically self-working. So I think that's going to be it for the part one of the arrays. So I do have another array video that I'm going to do next. It's going to show something a little more in depth, and we're going to be doing more with arrays. And it'll be another kind of practical example about a different way we can use arrays in our game. So that's going to be it for now. So thanks for watching and see you next time.